The Sahara of the mid-19th century was a vast domain, largely untouched by the world beyond its horizons. The tribes clustered at its oases, and the nomads wandering its dunes lived just as their ancestors did centuries in the past. Here, time had stood still. But across the Mediterranean, Europe was convulsing with change. Its restless nations, bloodied by the Napoleonic Wars, were now stepping up their rivalry and colonial expansion. France set its sights on the Sahara. The desert offered little beyond its colossal acreage, but its power vacuum made it enticing. The impossible task of seizing and maintaining control of the Sahara would fall on a hard-boiled force of soldiers as gritty as the desert sands, the French Foreign Legion. The force destined to become a legend began as a dumping ground. Thousands of veterans from Europe's battlegrounds had taken refuge in the saloons and side streets of France. Many drifted without purpose or scruples.
These people became very much of a nuisance in France. The French did not like them because of in many cases because of their political leanings, because they were refugees, because they were out of work, because they might resort to crime. So what better expedient than to gather these people up into a military unit, which was called the Légion étrangère, and get them out of the country. So they shipped these people to North Africa where they could benefit the French Empire.
Over the next century, the Foreign Legion staked France's claim to the Sahara by patrolling a vast region stretching from Morocco to Algeria to Tunisia. Here, the legionnaires waged two grueling wars, one against Arab, Berber, and Tuareg rebels who refused to submit to their authority, and another against the forbidding Sahara.
If you were looking for a place where you could be challenged, then Sahara was the place for you. I can't think of another battlefield in the world where men could survive days of marching at 110 degrees Fahrenheit plus heat and then freeze to death at night.
In the public imagination, the Sahara of the Foreign Legion was a sand-swept purgatory where men with tarnished pasts sought redemption through danger, or where the heartbroken could forget a lost love. In reality, most soldiers who trudged here were men with ordinary pasts faced with an extraordinary challenge. Grizzled sergeants tested their stamina and spirit with grueling training exercises.
The Legion became famous for its ability to march long distances. 20 miles a day was not unusual, with full pack that's 80 pounds plus of gear in this tremendous heat. In the course of training, some people, of course, didn't measure up right away. If you fell out and you continued to fall out, you'd likely get tied to the back of a cart by a pole, and you could either stand up and keep moving or be dragged over the rocks, over the sand, until you decided whether you were going to march or die.
This torture, reserved for soldiers willing but unable to keep pace with their comrades, paled in comparison with the abuses suffered by malingerers who shirked their duties.
You might be subjected to a form of punishment called the crapaudine. What it involved was tying a soldier's hands tightly behind his back, tying his ankles, and then hooking up the tied hands and the ankles, bending your back into a really awkward, tortured position. And you might be left in that position for hours.
The tortures legionnaires endured at the hands of their own commanders toughened them for their grueling war with the Sahara's native tribes. On April 26, 1882, the Legion and the desert's insurgents would clash in perhaps their most dramatic battle of all. The setting was a desolate valley in present-day Morocco called Chatigri. In a blinding sandstorm, 3 companies of legionnaires were escorting a surveying team that had been mapping the region. Suddenly, through the stinging mist, flooded an army of Arab horsemen. The bewildered legionnaires scrambled to assemble a defensive square, a tactical formation designed to repel an enemy assault from any direction.
A square is probably the best kind of defense against cavalry there is. They still can't see very well. All they know is that this enemy is coming at them.
Only when the storm briefly subsided did the French realize the nightmarish scope of their predicament. Charging toward their modest force of 300 men were nearly 8,000 Arabs.
And the legionnaires are up against it. I mean, if they try to break this square, if they try to get away, they're going to be caught in the open and killed.
But this chilling reality was already playing itself out. Dozens of mule-mounted legionnaires, blinded by the wind-swept sands, had been unable to find their way to the defensive square.
The poor legionnaires who got caught in the open at Chantilly and had to fight for Muleback paid a very heavy price. Almost all of them died either in the fighting or when they tried to mount a defense from behind their slaughtered mounts.
The Arabs launched charge after charge, but each was repulsed by the legion's disciplined fire. Finally, after 7 hours, the frustrated Arabs retreated, and the Battle of Chantilly was over. 2,000 Arab corpses littered the sands. The legion's dead numbered 42. 31 were wounded. 1 officer survived with 16 separate wounds, 9 by bullet and 7 by sword.
I think on both sides there was an incredible amount of determination and bravery, and this is quite a classic Saharan engagement. "23 years after this fateful skirmish, in 1905, the Foreign Legion forced the last of the Sahara's insurgent tribes to submit to French rule.
So the French finally conquered the Sahara, but having got the Sahara, well, what are you going to do with it? They discovered that it has no value whatsoever. All of this effort has gone in to conquering the Sahara, and in the end, it brings the French very little value.
Even so, France would cling tenaciously to its colonies in North Africa until 1962. Throughout the 20th century, foreign powers would continue to author epic dramas in the Sahara. During the Second World War, 2 rival forces would wage a desperate struggle, not only against each other, but also the hostile desert.